That's the first time ever that we've ever been able to start recording at an even time. What's going on, people? We're back. Another episode of Talkin Thrones, Season 6, Episode 2. After a gangbusters, I think, from both of our fronts, season premiere, we are back with Episode 2 entitled Home. Ironically enough, the same name as a DreamWorks movie that came out roughly around the same time, if I'm not mistaken. Pat, what are your thoughts before we get this episode started?
Hey, Dom. I think the Talking TV family here, Talking Thrones with us, totally believes that home is where the heart is, and that heart is now beating back in Jon's chest. So it's right there in the wall, right at Castle Black. That's where our home is.
Absolutely. Yeah, they made this no secret. They didn't stretch this out for any long amount of time. And we're going to talk about that on today's episode of Talking Thrones. All right, Pat, we're back. Season 6, Episode 2. And after last week's episode was just so awesome, it felt so refreshing. It felt like we were back. It felt like Game of Thrones had come back. We get the second episode that is one of these episodes we get every season, the plot episode, where they just throw a whole bunch of stuff at you. They continue a couple storylines from the last episode. They wrap up some storylines that we didn't think they were going to do. They introduce a couple new storylines. They even bring back some storylines from previous seasons earlier. Like I said, season 6 is all about wrapping up some of those lingering threads from earlier on. And we get probably one of the most surprising things is that they bring Jon back this episode. Everybody kind of knew in their heart of hearts are like, okay, they're not going to keep him dead for very long. So we may as well just get to this. And that's exactly what they did. So what are your thoughts on the decision to bring Jon back this early in the season?
Hey, listen, I totally expected it to be like episode 1, Jon's back, right? A little Ace Frehley back in the Lord Commander groove parody.
Yeah.
It's like I thought it was going to be just Melisandre arrives and it's like, wham, bam, you're alive, man, type of thing. But they held off one episode, and I think I think they did that to establish Davos and Tormund as like main allies. Like, yeah, these guys have Jon's back, and they give us a little glimpse of like what life's going to be without them, right? So like Tormund didn't show up in last episode, but he has his moments here as he comes and secures Castle Black, in the name of Jon and what has happened to him. So, I think it gives us these great character moments. It also kind of gives us a little bit of character moment with Melisandre. I know we said that it didn't make any sense, the whole magic necklace thing, but, we spent a little time with her in this, episode. Her doubts are really showing clear here that, her doubts of Stannis, she didn't really pick the right horse there, and she realizes that after 5 seasons. And now she really doubts that she can bring Jon back. And, this is the first time we've really seen Melisandre in the last couple episodes really have this weakness. And I think for the most part, it's adding a little more dimension to the character. And also the whole storyline of the Lord of Light.
100%. Yeah, we get a lot more development with them in that sense. But the other big thing, too, about this episode, Bran's back, finally. After a whole season of us not having him, he's finally back, and we finally get the introduction of that storyline.
Such a bad decision to leave Bran out of season 5. Like, anytime that they needed to really give us, like, something magical, nondescript, and really just create cool scenes, they could have just thrown it to Bran and the three-eyed raven and just showed us some trippy, basically prequel-esque flashback scenes. It's one of those things where I think they missed out using Bran in the last season.
100%, yeah, because the thing is that even though Bran gets a bad rap for the last couple seasons, obviously for just becoming the full-on three-eyed raven, the whole Dr. Manhattan of the Game of Thrones and kind of losing all emotion or any real interest as a character, the fact that we had gone an entire season without him and the fact that he had such a, his part had been progressively decreasing in screen time over the over the next couple of seasons as, they kind of faded the magic stuff into the background in order to focus more on the political edge. The decision to bring him back clearly signifies a sharp shift, much more so into the magic features. And I will say, I did kind of miss him. It reminds you like how much of a charming kid he is. The fact that he's kind of like, the naive youth that's starting to get into the magic and the training to become the three-eyed raven. He's kind of like our eyes and ears in that sense. I think it's really cool. And for the most part, I think that even though they're unfortunately cut tragically short in the middle of the season, I think all of his training sessions with the three-eyed raven here and kind of all the little bit of into the past and history that we get, obviously, as we know, it was just later a setup for by the end of the season, him being the first one in a while to figure out Jon Snow's true parentage. And ultimately how that really doesn't mean anything towards the end of the show. But yeah, it's a pretty, what's it called? It's a pretty big development there as far as that goes. So why don't we start there and then we'll save the Jon moment for the end of the episode. So.
Yeah, totally. Listen, the three-eyed raven is showing
another
Bran
recast too. Max von Sydow now too.
Yeah, 100%. Maybe that's the reason why they kept the storyline out of the fifth season.
Oh man,
is like they maybe they were just like recasting, or they had to make a casting call last second, and they were like, oh, we don't got time for this. Obviously there could be other reasons. I'm just speculating here, but listen, this scene that we get this episode, obviously with Ned Stark fighting one of the biggest swordsmen that ever lived in Westeros. And then Bran is like, I've heard the stories,
the Arthur Dayne fight.
Yeah, my father kicked his butt, like totally Bran has been, a little propaganda that his parents told him about this story. And,
yes,
it turns out, the three-eye raven's going to show him a little truth.
Exactly.
And he's not going to like it.
Yeah, this gets into a little bit of Game of Thrones lore and history, which we kind of left behind in season 1, but it was really interesting to see them bring that back and, get this really interesting character concept. We get to see younger versions of characters that we haven't spent time with in a couple seasons. Like this almost kind of reminds us like, wow, it's been 6 years since we last saw Ned Stark, who was originally, again, the main character of this show. So getting to see like a younger version of him portrayed brilliantly by the actor, I believe his name is Robert Aramayo in the younger seasons. I know he's also going to be playing a younger Elrond in the upcoming Lord of the Rings Amazon show,
cool.
Ironically enough. So he gets to play 2 younger versions of characters. But like, I love the kind of the perspective that it gives. Also, as they need to like casually drop, including this very famous sequence from the books, the fact that all of Ned's soldiers that were with him died in that fight, except for famously Howland Reed, Mira's father, who also was the one who saved Ned in that fight, providing a little bit of context to the whole Bran Mira thing before Ned starts climbing up the stairs. And then obviously this is when the three-eyed raven pulls him out and gives the whole famous, the past is like the sea. It's pretty to look at, but if you stay too long, you'll drown.
I thought the whole, Bran whispering to his father and the father recognizing it, and we can see that the three-eyed raven has a little bit of ability to affect the past. And, it's not necessarily like they are going to totally change like the outcome, but the fact is like Ned could have had this feeling that, someone was whispering to him, and there's really it plants that idea because we know what's going to happen with Odor later on, that that has a little more of a drastic impact on a character's life, the whole seeing into the past. And I think it's well set up here in this sequence, and we don't necessarily need to see what's at the top of the tower because that's going to be a scene for another time. In terms of just this sword fight and the fact that Ned Stark, who, up until this point is portrayed as the perfect, honorable, warrior, he's a killer, and we understand that he's going to do what he has to do to survive and protect his friends and allies. But there's a certain honor code that he lives by. And we see this scene, and obviously the victories are told by the victors, right? The history, right? So Ned Stark decided to tell this tale that he, beat this swordsman, but we get to see that, obviously he wasn't necessarily 100% honest all the time, that, he had to play this game to a certain degree. So, it's very interesting that maybe in his younger days, he was more willing to play the game than when we saw him, in the first season.
Well, we definitely know he was, because it was effective. It was his negotiating power that is what allowed, the Northmen. It allowed him to rally the Northmen and bring them behind Robert Baratheon. There's a reason why Ned always seemed to be like that perfect figurehead that the North gravitated towards. It's because Ned Stark clearly did have some knowledge of the game. It just came from his overall detest, probably, of it, and obviously as he saw, the damage and destruction that it brought, obviously with the death of the Targaryen, the Targaryen children oh my god, in King's Landing. But the biggest thing I think also is what an impact this has on Bran, is because this is his coming of age moment right here. Obviously the year absent that he was absent obviously shows Isaac Hempstead Wright's going through a pretty significant growth spurt. He doesn't look like a little kid anymore, so they got to mature him up real quick. And him, like, kind of, and the fact that the simple fact of the matter is, even though he's been in a heap load of danger obviously since his inception of the show, he still also has not quite had the coming of age moments that Jon, Arya, and Sansa, his remaining surviving siblings, have. So this is kind of his major coming of age moment. And it also reflects in Mira, where you would think that in the books it's definitely set up where Bran and Mira have a much more romantic relationship, but here it's obviously much more so done. And they really almost do have no connection. It really is just the fact that she loves Jojen, and Jojen was the one that was supporting Bran this entire time. So now they've kind of lost that connection, and now Mira's stuck in this place hundreds of thousands of miles from her home. One of her closest family member, the one that she swore to protect, is now dead, all in service of Bran, who's kind of just poking his head up out of the weeds and being like, hey, I saw this vision today. I saw my dad today. And Mira's like, great. I think that dynamic is still really well fleshed out. And then it's also, unfortunately, it's kind of ruined in hindsight by the fact that the child of the Forest is like, Bran will need you. And it's like, yeah, literally just to bring him back through the wall, because the minute that they make it back to Winterfell, she's like, yeah, I'm dipping. I'm going back to my family. And then Bran's like, thanks. See ya. And then she just never see it again. So a little bit of a
yeah, it is a little weird how they wrap that story up. But
yeah, it's one of the biggest things I think that stands out from season 7, is that as much as I enjoy that season, that moment is like, oh man,
yeah,
what's going on here?
It's basic. At least she didn't get locked, right?
True.
Where he just joins another storyline and gets brutally murdered. like she gets to just go home, enjoy life.
Right. The walkers don't even make it past Winterfell, so she's just like, huh, wow, maybe I did get something out of it this way,
Yeah, she's gonna have a great story where it's like, yeah, I was north of the wall when the zombies were killing everybody.
Yeah.
And then I decided to just get south, and it worked out for me.
It worked out pretty well. I just happened to be bringing along one of the guys who supposedly was the key to defeating them, even though, what did he do in the end besides act as bait and control some crows? I don't know. Anyways, but let's not talk about the future.
He should have done more, like, some Street Fighter, like,
I thought that what he was going to do, this is the serious thought that I thought was going to happen. I thought that he was going to try and work into the Night King and try and do some, like, Professor X sort of thing. Like, I did actually, like, believe in some credibility of the idea of Bran becoming the Night King in some capacity. Like, that did make a lot of sense to me after a certain while,
Yeah, no, I think, that would have been it would have been pretty interesting to see some sort of, psychic connection between the two. And, maybe it just delays the Night King enough where, Arya's a little assassination, Deus Ex Machina, maybe it hides that better and just, it gives us a reason for her ability to kind of sneak up on him and take him out.
Right, maybe. I don't know. Like I said, so I did this last season where I pretty much did like a ranking of the storylines this season. I think like last season, the best storylines being The Wall and I'm forgetting the other one that was really good. I mean, The Wall was number 1, but there was I think I had King's Landing up there pretty high, as far as the setup goes. But this season, it's easily everything that's going on beyond The Wall, and then obviously everything going on with Jon as he makes his way from The Wall to becoming King of the North in Winterfell after the Battle of the Bastards. So the rest of the storylines this season kind of range from a pretty good to no doy. But let's get to the biggest, I think, most obvious no doy, that's not Meereen in this episode, which is everything going on in the north, which is where Roose and Ramsay are trying to have this discussion after they find that their hunters are dead. So Ramsay proposes, let's just attack Castle Black. And Roose, for whatever reason, is like, oh, that'll alienate us from the rest of the north. And I'm like, since when does the north have any love for the Night's Watch at all? I'm pretty sure the whole biggest thing is that the Night's Watch has always been some entity in and of itself. And then that poor Maester comes in and is like, oh, Lady Waldo's giving birth to a boy. And naturally, this is when Ramsay pulls the sneak attack. Well, not really sneak attack, and just hugs him and then kills his dad right there. And it's like, oh, well, bye-bye to Roose Bolton. I remember watching it and I was like, wow, this really came out of nowhere. And it's a moment.
Me, myself, I don't have any things to say. I think
There's nothing
the
really to say
last,
to it. It's like I said, it's the
yeah,
most obvious what we talked about it last episode, where it's like, wow, they're
yeah,
really
exactly.
hammering home here that like Roose has lost faith in Ramsay again.
They
When it
clearly set
clearly
it up in the last episode, the first episode of the season, that this was going to happen. My thoughts on it was that Roose definitely, he would be a little more cunning and kind of see this coming and at least have a little bit of battle of wits before Ramsay's violence proves to outdo Roose. And I thought a little more complexity to this assassination would have been warranted here, just because like Roose, like you mentioned, masterminded sort of the Red Wedding, and here it is, his own son, who he knows is sadistic, and he knows that he's kind of unstable. Roose does nothing to
kind
really
of.
protect himself from that. So I think Roose could have totally saw this coming and been prepared for it, but like obviously you can't prepare for such a nightmare that Ramsay is that there could have been some sort of trick at play that Ramsay ones up his father and
Yeah.
really give Ramsay some way of earning his place at the head of the Bolton family,
Right.
not just sort of like, well, pops, it's time for me to take control of this popsicle stand, and just stab him. Like it's too easy for Ramsay to gain control, and there's no consequence. Everybody like falls in line.
Right.
Like
It's literally just a
Ramsay
blunder
is
and
a
miss it. It's like,
bastard.
okay.
Yeah, Ramsay's a bastard. He's someone that's been legitimized, but like also he's sadistic, and not everybody in the camp is going to necessarily agree. Like one of the most sadistic people that we know, Locke, got murdered. So like there's not exactly any like other allies that have been set up in this story that really show that Ramsay would totally 100% gain control by stabbing his father.
Yeah,
And
if anything, they try to make up for it after the fact with the introduction of the Karstarks and the Umbers and how they're all of a sudden magically allies with Ramsay, and they give like a bunch of heaped exposition in order to try and explain that. But yeah, for me, strangely enough, though, the death that does work is his brutal massacre of Walda and the baby. And the reason why I say that is because now that we're past the drudgery of season 5, where season 5 is almost like, oh, we're just reminding you constantly and poking and prodding you how awful and how despicable of a character Ramsay is, Here, I think it's more so like almost like the conclusion of his arc, where Ramsay, I think between seasons 3, 4, and now this arc, I think is like peak Ramsay, where you have his introduction in season 3, where I think they do a brilliant job with the bait and switch of his character and using that as a trick in order to entrap Theon. I thought that was so brilliant and really helped to sell like the cunning and just how the terrifying nature of his character as like the new resident psychopath on the show. Then season 4, you kind of get to see him in action, but it is strange where you do see a little bit of a growth from him, where you establish his dynamic with his father, which at that point had not been seen yet, and then you kind of build in this relationship with Theon, obviously with a very problematic midpoint, until he is able to ultimately prove to his father that he is worthy of the Bolton name by using Theon in order to legitimize and gain and finalize their control over the North. Then season 5 is kind of the fun and games of his arc, for better or for worse. But this is, I think, a good conclusion where he finds his newly established, legitimacy challenged. He immediately makes moves to deal it out, and then ultimately has to suffer the consequences, where he thinks he is now top shit and then has to be brought down a peg by the end. And I think they do a great job of continuing that, at least with his brutalistic murder of Walda and the baby. It's kind of a perfect.
I also think that the Walda scene is, it's getting us acclimated to this idea, Miranda, right? Feed her to the hounds. This episode, we see him bring Walda into the kennel and open up the cages and allow the dogs to attack her and murder her and the baby. The fact is, like, we're sort of laying in the groundwork for Ramsay's fall at the end of the season, because ultimately after they take back Winterfell and they capture Ramsay, what do? They have this bittersweet end where they kind of feed him and leave him to the hounds. So it's one of those things where we're setting up like this cathartic moment where Ramsay kind of gets his comeuppings after the Battle of the Bastards. So this is a really well placed scene that sets the tone for the rest of the season. It gives us sort of a framework to work on. Here he is at the top of his game, murdering people in that kennel. And then obviously, he comes to the same fate that he's given so many people in this world. So, it's kind of like a great bookend for his story in this particular season. In terms of, Well Done the Baby, like, again, this sort of feels like another Dorne moment where it's like, Roose is kind of like no longer needed. So let's just wrap that up. Let's wrap Waldo and the baby up. And, it kind of definitely for me seems like, okay, we're just giving him control. We just need him to be elevated to that next level, to make the fight with John, even more, basically, higher staked. So, it's one of those things where they might have spent a little more time last season really setting this stuff up, so that, here at the beginning of the season, it just doesn't seem like it comes out of nowhere. So that's my only complaint here is that, again, it sort of feels rushed into, but I think it's clever enough to really set up the Battle of the Bastards.
Absolutely, yeah. So now let's get to King. Let's cut to King's Landing real quick. We'll do a couple of these other storylines before we get to Theon and how that leads into the reintroduction of the Iron Island. So King's Landing.
The High Sparrow was in this episode. I just saw in the notes.
Yeah, the High. Well, yeah, you're like, wait, the High Sparrow's in this episode, but also it's the fact that it's like we get one good scene, then we get another kind of a waste of a scene with Tom, and where I'm like, okay, why does this even need to be in this episode? But I do think that the Jaime High Sparrow scene is good, if nothing but a little redundant. It's supposed to evoke a lot of previous feelings. Joffrey's funeral at the beginning of season 4, Tywin's funeral at the beginning of season 5. It feels like every season is supposed to begin with the Lannister death, so much so to the point where when they see Tommen dead at the end of season 6, Cersei's like, yeah, no more funerals this time. We've already buried enough dead Lannisters. But again, they.
No, I'm just gonna say, like, it's very interesting because this scene really takes the moment to bring up the argument between the uber rich and wealthy and the masses of people that live under their control. And it's one of the only times that Game of Thrones sort of just like right in your face tells you like how the world works, and like it's very interesting that they take us a little bit out of the escapism, and they make the High Sparrow, who more or less is like, sort of a villain in this story, and they give him that position of saying like, if the masses actually stood up, we could take down empires. And, that's something that, translates into the human condition, into modern society, that, if people do band together and are self-sufficient, we understand that tyranny can be overcome. And it's very interesting. It almost, brings up this political point right in the middle of this episode. I don't know if that's really intentional or not, or they just kind of want to jump on that bandwagon and throw it in the show and try to connect Game of Thrones to be, a show of the people. But it's one of those rare times where they kind of throw the messaging right in our face.
Yeah, and one of the rare instances where I think it does kind of work, because it both accomplishes the point as well as letting, the High Sparrow get one up on Jaime, who is just clearly itching to, to draw his sword and kill him ultimately. Obviously it's meant to be a tactical advantage, because obviously there's nothing stopping Jaime from killing that guy after finding out what he put Cersei through. So the High Sparrow has to constantly reinforce that, like, yeah, I'm surrounded at all times, and you never know when I'm going to be surrounded. So it's a good little use of physical force there. Then I'm just going to skip over the Cersei Tommen stuff, because there's nothing that really comes from it other than Tommen is like, Mommy, please tell me how to be a stronger leader. And I'm like,
yeah, well, it's the whole thing is like, we get the scene where, Cersei's coming down the stairs to go to Marcella's funeral. And, you got like, 10 guys who are basically compelling her to stay home. And you have the Mountain, who's just ready to go at any moment.
He's just constantly by her, just at all times.
Yeah, and these 10 guys, like, they are delivering, Tommen's message.
Yes.
And they do not want her to take it the wrong way, because they understand that the Mountain's going to mow them down.
Yeah.
If Cersei decides to push past, Tommen's concern for her going to this, funeral. Right. So it's a very good scene. It shows like really the threat that the Mountain poses, which is also, was it in this episode or the next episode where the Mountain goes around town killing?
I'm pretty sure that's the next episode because then that
Okay.
leads directly into the small council meeting.
Gotcha. So we'll get to that, at a future episode. But yeah, the Mountain just now sort of getting introduced as this really formidable foe that no one can really take down, no matter what the odds are. We're starting to see that peppered in here. Obviously, the conversation between Tommen and Cersei is gearing us up for when Tommen goes full, radical religious on us. It's sort of getting us to that storyline because, Cersei should give him guidance. He's not getting what, guidance he needs. And he's going to turn to the High Sparrow and Marjorie to really try to fill that void that he has. Whether or not that's the right move for him, that we'll never know because he basically is very easily hoodwinked.
Yeah.
Tywin knew that in season 4. And I think that it was beautifully set up that like whoever sort of controls Tommen's moods and, can talk into his ear is really going to have control over the power of the kingdom. And, that's something that, Cersei doesn't necessarily have the ability to do.
Yeah, definitely not. It's one of those things where I think the biggest thing that's kind of established by this season is Cersei's final acceptance that her children are gone, both before and after their deaths. She kind of had that moment at the end of last episode, in that moment in last episode, where she was kind of acknowledging Maggie the Frog's prophecy about her children after losing both Joffrey and Myrcella. And so it almost feels like there's kind of like doom cloud hanging over Tommen throughout this entire season, especially when he unveils especially because it feels like he's just going out of his way to just endanger his mother. First, obviously, with the whole decision to ally with the High Sparrow, and then with his decision to ban trials by combat. It's like, dude, you're sentencing your mother to death here. So she kind of ends up having to make some moves of her own in order to ensure her survival. And it sucks that she can't even depend on her own son. Now we move on to the next Nodoid storyline, Mirror. We're just going to spend 5 seconds on this, then go past, because this is I don't even know what this scene accomplishes ultimately. I really don't. Like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on it because I already complained about all the problems that I have with the season last episode. Basically, Tyrion reveals from Varys that Nodoid, the slave masters, have retaken Yunkai and Astapor. And then Tyrion's like, well, we have 2 dragons still, even though Daenerys has the 3rd. Why don't we try taking a leaf out of How to Train Your Dragon's book and trying to befriend them? And it results in Tyrion telling this half-baked story to the dragons as he takes their chains off, and that's what endears them to him.
I don't know. It's a good scene. Well, I think, first of all, he goes in there, he, starts talking to them. He puts the torch, which can be seen as a weapon. He puts it on the ground, so he's doing all the right moves to basically treat the dragons as if they're intelligent creatures. And, obviously, there's CG monsters here. So, whether we as the audience believe that, he sort of approached them diplomatically and sort of was able to win a little favor with them, that might be a little, believe it or not, that's up to you to decide. But obviously the first dragon, which I would imagine is the sort of in the pecking order of dragons, is the kind of lowest. He pulls out the basically the bolt that holds the chains, and then as soon as he turns around, the other dragon seems to realize what he's doing, and so shows his neck and basically wants the bolt taken out as well. So I think it's one of those things where the dragons at first might think he's a dinner, and they're kind of like analyzing him. But obviously, when he lets them go, I think they understand what he's doing and the gesture he's making. And so that sort of endears them a little bit to them. But again, this is one of those scenes where it's really just like Tyrion walks into a room with dragons drunk. Does he make it out of there?
It's like they come up with the idea for a joke. And it would have been one thing if
but
the
thing is, it's all about, does he get out of that situation? And, the beauty of the scene is that we, the audience, contribute whatever we want to what took place in that scene. So it's the writers aren't really telling us the full story. We, the audience, actually get to put what we think into what happened. So there's a little bit of audience participation in this sequence, and I think that's what makes it work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the biggest thing here also, I think why it doesn't work is the fact that this seems to be clearly setting up for, because this was also around the time where there were a lot of fan theories circling around about how Tyrion might also be a secret Targaryen. And there are a lot of my friends I remember that I was talking to at the time were like convinced. They're like, dude, Tywin said all the time that Tyrion was not his son. It could be that Tyrion could be a secret Lannister. And it felt like, okay, if it was setting up for Tyrion to be the third dragon rider, because obviously we know that Jon rides Rhaegal during the fight with the undead, but no, ultimately that ends up being a little bit of a bait and switch, because Viserion ends up dying and becoming the dragon that the Night King rides, obviously, when he revives it at the end. And I don't know, it kind of feels like just another waste of a storyline. So only other thing really on Essos is the Bravos front, where Arya, she gets beat up by the wave some more, but this time Jaqen comes along in order to play a little bit of a bow, little bit of a carrot and the stick situation going on right here, And he's like, oh, so you'll get I can give you your eyesight back, I can give you food, I can give you comfort. All you have to do is just say that you want it. And she's like, no, she definitely understands. She's learned her lesson. She's like, no, I understand that this is a trick. I'm not gonna do this. And he's like, okay, you've passed. And he lets her come back to the temple. A little bit of a yin and yang, a little bit of a, okay, we're gonna take some pity on her. But at the end of the day, I'm like, cool, just more impetus for her to absolutely despise the Faceless Men just for their shameless treatment of her.
This whole storyline is really going slow, right? So they kind of introduced this whole idea that she's blind and getting beat up last episode. Here it is, like, oh, you don't want to do that anymore. Like, just answer these questions. All right, we'll give you a second chance. So we don't really have much going on with this storyline. We don't, know where the next chapter of this is going to happen. So it just bridges the fact that she went blind at the end of last season to the point where she's going to get a second chance. That's all that's transpired in these two sequences between episode 1 and 2 of season 6. And we'll have to see where the storyline goes. Like, they're being very economical and not really showing us much. And as we watch this season, we'll probably find out that there really isn't much behind this storyline. I think, what does she do? She has to become an actor to take down someone. First
she starts watching the play. He sends her to observe and just watch the play.
Yeah,
and then and then very similar to the oyster salesman, he casually unveils who her target is going to be, because he doesn't want her to have any sort of emotional connection to her again. And of course, what happens this time is she ends up becoming endeared to who is supposed to be her target. And then
exactly, it's this is chance too.
Yeah.
And the whole thing plays out, very much like opportunity number 1. So,
yeah,
it's one of those things where I think it's a slow burning storyline. Hey, listen, it's Arya's a cool character. We like to see where it goes, but at the end of the day, she literally just decides to run away from these folks and becomes, sort of this silent assassin in Westeros.
It leaves me with a lot of questions about the end of her arc, namely, if the Faceless Men cared this much, right, that she tried to send away, why didn't they try to keep sending people after her? Because, she threatened Jaqen, but it's Jaqen's not the only Faceless Man, so why, wouldn't he's definitely gonna be like, oh yeah, I'm totally gonna take her seriously and totally not gonna send anybody else after her. I don't know. I think more missed opportunities for Arya's arc, specifically with the last.
I think it might not be something that they really explored in this, but the fact of the matter is, it might be the understanding the practicality of being human versus being a faceless man. So there are going to be these urges for you to basically use this ability for personal gain. But that sort of reveals you, it puts you out in the open. It gives you an opportunity to be had, right? And so maybe that's the lesson that's being learned here in this storyline, is that, you really have to become someone else, ignore those things, let things slide and really figure out a way to get to your target without being seen or noticed or really allowing for the blowback to come your way. And, obviously we don't get that fully developed. Maybe that's what they were going for, maybe not. But I think the fact is, it could just be a way of life. And because when we jump to season 7 and we see Arya and she's sort of, this new silent assassin back in Westeros, she seems to have accomplished this ability to separate herself as Arya versus the silent assassin, and basically be able to live both lives perfectly fine and not necessarily get caught when she takes Walter Frey out and all that type of stuff. So it's one of those things where, like, I think the storyline kind of meanders and kind of shows us a couple things, and this is a case of the audience has to fill in the blanks to decide what they want. And I don't think we have really enough dots to connect here. I'm just grasping at straws to try to put this together. And, that's the type of storyline this ends up being.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. So let's get to, again, another big reintroduction for this season, the Iron Islands. We get it back after 2 seasons of not seeing anything. We had the brief moment in season 4 where Yara tried to lead that raid on the Dreadfort, still questioning their decision to put that in. But this is the first time that we've really seen the Iron Islands since the finale of season 3, obviously, when we had the brief insert where Yara proudly declared to Balon that she was that she was going to go and rescue Theon. Once again, like you were saying, a very economical use, I should say, of the Arya storyline. Not a great economical use of the Iron Island storyline throughout the entire season. This storyline is just one of those that just seems to pop in and out whenever it seems important. It was really important in season 2 to establish Theon. Then they kind of just ignored it until the end of season 3 when Yara said she was going to go Theon. Then they're in one episode in season 4, and then they just probably disappear for an entire season, And now they're back, and they have somewhat of a significant part over the next 2 seasons, only for them to once again vanish and not really be that important in season 8. But for right now, we need the storyline because we need to introduce Euron Greyjoy, who supposedly is going to be the big bad of the last 2 seasons. It starts off Balon just chastising Yara for giving up on the invasion of the North. And this is the other problem with how they utilize the Iron Island storyline is I'm like, how does this only serves to confuse the Game of Thrones storyline even more, because now they're constantly putting timestamps on like how long it's been since certain events happened for no reason. And the fact that the Iron Islanders were absent for all of last season, I'm just like, how much time has gone by? And aside from the one instance where we saw the Boltons taking back Moke Island from them in season 4, we haven't really seen this. So we're not exactly sure like what happened with the Ironborn invasion in the North, other than brief conversation. We assumed that the Boltons drove them out, but like it just feels so weird for this to be inserted back in this way, and then the way that Balon is criticizing Yara, and to the point where Balon is just acting like a complete fool now, where it's like, okay, Balon obviously has never been the brightest ruler, clearly, but the whole reason why he invaded the North in the first place was because he saw a tactical advantage. The majority of the Northerners had gone south to fight in the war. But as Yara says, it's like they're all back now. Thanks to the Boltons, they were restored in their castle. They've driven us out. They've united against us. We can't stand against the united North. And the fact that Balon is trying to continue this invasion, it's like, yeah, maybe it is a good idea to get this out of here. Maybe Euron Greyjoy does have something going for him,
Yeah, I think Balon obviously, just gets thrown off the bridge here. Like there's no subtle way for me to say this. His character has kind of run its course, and you just sort of show him obsessed with what we know as the viewer his mission was, which is to cause basically chaos in the North and take over the coastal cities and really expand his territory. And he's obsessed with that. And then he walks across the bridge and gets thrown off it. And, that's a subtle way of saying like, hey, the Ironborn, they got a brand new, bag, baby, to use the Austin Powers terminology. So basically,
I thought you were going to go with Papa's got a brand new bag from.
Well, yeah, I guess, we could bring up that reference too. I don't know where I was going with that reference.
Yeah, I was about to say that one kind of felt.
The fact of the matter is, we got a brand new leader here. It's going to be a new way of the Ironborn sort of doing things, and there's hope, right, for the storyline that it's going to be interjected and it's going to be a little more relevant to what's been going on in the main storylines here. So I think that's what happens this season is the Ironborn sort of get rebranded, and they come in. hot and basically we see them as major players until again they're sort of just sort of put on a back burner and they exist in the world, but their storyline kind of wraps up like relatively quickly, later on in the series.
If anything, the thing that I'll say, it's kind of ironic because Euron Greyjoy becomes another character that becomes heavily criticized in the last 2 seasons. But the strange thing is that with the way that they introduced Euron here, you almost can't help but agree with him simply for the fact that he just brings up all points that are 100% true. The fact of the matter is they kind of very much changed Euron's character from the book. He's a late entry character, and those characters are usually pretty hit or miss. Obviously we were just talking about Better Call Saul earlier. They brought Lalo in at the end of season 4, and he's now become such a force to be reckoned with as as part of being a crucial part of that show. And so they try to do the same thing with Euron Greyjoy, but I think the character fails for 2 reasons. One, I don't personally think the actor's that good. Pilu Iceback, he gives a very one-note performance. He doesn't really, I feel like, get into a lot of the range and the depth that is so well known for all these characters in the show. And the other problem too is the fact that they have him in this
but whether or not that's his fault is up for
that's a
debate
different
here.
story, exactly. Because again, he's a late entry character, so we don't exactly have.
He only has the scenes that the writers give him, and the fact of the matter is, his character is not really given these great, well-written sequences. His character development is really just on the fly. It's always related to a major storyline, so we don't really necessarily get enough time with the character to really see where this actor could take it. So yeah, it's more, I think, a problem with just like, this is a character, he's obviously going to side with Cersei at some point, and it's kind of just like very straight to the point, one note, like you said.
Absolutely, yeah. And so it's a shame because I think this is a character that could have been awesome, because this is a character that has significantly less screen time, or should I say less page time in the books when he's introduced, obviously, because this is, we're now getting into the Iron Island storyline that actually was in the books in book 4, A Feast for Crows. And that obviously transpires much differently with the Kingsmoot and with Euron taking control of the Iron Islands. And the biggest thing here about Euron is that he does it very tactfully. He does it almost kind of from the shadows. He lets everyone else say their piece, and then he comes in. He's very soft-spoken, but he's very threatening. He's very menacing. This is a world traveler, He famously has this eye patch in the books. He's traveled around the world. He's gone to Ashai. There's a rumor that he's experimented with dark magic. And it even seemed like in the books, he sends out his brother Victarion and his troops on very specific raiding missions in order to very tactfully maintain the Ironhold's presence, the Ironborn's presence, I should say, in Westeros. He famously sends Victarion west to woo to bring Daenerys to him in order for him to marry him. And then he, meanwhile, goes and raids Old Town. And the theory is that he is raiding Old Town for some ancient texts that have to do with dark magic that could potentially, some have even rumored, give him control over the White Walkers. Like Euron is very much being set up as like a very big threat to come in the books, and it's a shame because they barely scratch the surface of that character in the books. It kind of ends up being this like really crazy one note, just kind of cackle factory of a character, like a bad Captain Jack Sparrow wannabe, and it really sucks because the Kingsmoot storyline for me was one of the better secondary storylines, similar to Dorne in the books, and they just kind of flub it. They obviously spend significantly less time with it because they want to focus it on Theon, but I don't know. There still feels like there's something missing from this entire storyline.
Well, I feel like in TV, you have a show that's lasted 6 seasons, and at this point, you have fan favorites, and you have sort of an expectation that's going on. And this show has always been like, hey, that's your fan favorite. Well, we're gonna off them. But for the most part, at some point they give plot armor to some of the main characters, and they're not really going to do much with them until really the final season when all bets are off. And to bring in new characters and have them competing for screen time with established characters, the ones that we tune into the show week to week, I think that's really the bounce that they had to work with. And obviously they decide, hey, we'll do a couple scenes here and there and whatever, but we got to streamline Euron's character. Like he's got to integrate well into what we have going on with the Iron Isles. It's got to be in the scope of Theon. It's really Theon's story, but obviously Euron's there to play antagonist to a newly forged Theon and Yara storyline.
Absolutely, yeah. So now let's bring it back to the wall, back to the centerfold of the action. We get to see the payoff from last week's awesome setup. Obviously, Sir Alistair and the Night's Watch are ready to break down the doors. Sir Davos and his Night's Watch members are ready to defend themselves against Jon's body. At that point, like I said, it's like, I really don't understand why you're trying to fight for a corpse, but they're obviously still under the impression that they can hold off long enough in order to have Melisandre resurrect Jon, presumably after Ed brings back the wildlings. And it all seems like all hope is lost. Davos gives a really awesome speech beforehand. He gives off, I never thought I'd have to use one of these apologies for what you're about to see as they bring out the swords. It's this really great heightened moment of tension. And then you hear the rumbling on the doors before the giant breaks down the doors and the wildling army comes charging in. It definitely, I think, is a little bit less eventful than Woman of Hope, but just given how vast the wildling numbers are and how easily they outnumber the Night's Watch members, it's really funny. You get 2 moments of comedy where Tormund kills one guy who tries to come out and kill him before restraining Ollie, and then one poor soul accidentally fires a crossbow into the giant. And
I don't think he accidentally fired it. He fires it, expecting something, but he really, worse. Oh man, like that effect, is far from perfect, but it serves its purpose.
Yeah.
Right. Just picks him up, bashes his head against the wall, and like leisurely throws him in front of all the Night's Watch, and it's like, this could be all of you being smashed against the wall like this, or you could surrender. So, visually we see like hostilities come to a quick end because there's just no way that the Night's Watch is really going to fight back against this force. So yeah, it's again, this shows that you don't need a large, long battle for every little plot point. This is a small skirmish. The wildlings come back. They secure the area. Davos and the supporters of Jon Snow basically take back control of the Night's Watch. And, this is really, we don't know what the purpose of that is, but Davos is going to tell Melisandre to give it the good old college try and try to resurrect Jon. I don't even think he really knows why he's asking for it. He just, has seen the magic and realizes that maybe the world would be better off with Jon alive.
Yeah.
And, they go ahead and do the ceremony.
Well, it's an interesting tidbit there because, like you said, it's like Melisandre kind of even reminds him. It's like, look, everything that the flames told me, it was all a lie. Stannis, I believed in. It's like, okay, so I may have the power to resurrect Jon, and even if I do resurrect him, what point is that going to be? Davos, obviously, we like Davos. We think Davos is a good guy. We've been just by watching his actions, even though he's not a perfect man. We've led to assume that Davos is one of the more fan favorite characters. He's got a good, solid head on his shoulders. He has a good sense of right and wrong. He's really good at kind of rallying and inspiring people. And so naturally, because Davos has that sense on his head and because we sympathize and rely on him so much, we kind of have this expectation that we can come to depend on Jon, even though we also have this knowledge in our head of all the good that Jon has done, So we kind of preemptively know that Jon will that ultimately the world is better off with Jon Snow alive rather than dead. So I think that it's that kind of introspection while also kind of unknowing, but also mixed with a little bit of dramatic irony that kind of sells the rather quickness that comes, because this easily could have been something that really in any other TV show probably would have been dragged out for at least a couple episodes, at least until the midpoint. They may have dragged out, the siege, as far as, Davos and the Night's Watch having to hold them off until Ed trying to negotiate with the wildlings, all that. But like I said, the show's a lot more fast-paced, a lot more fast-tracked. They got to get towards the ending. So Melisandre does the ceremony. They don't think it works. They have the dramatic moment of pause where everyone leaves the room. The camera zooms in really close on Jon, and then you see Ghost wake up before he starts breathing, and it's a really good effect. It's a really good shocker in order to kind of cue you into the cut to black right as he suddenly starts breathing there. It's really good direction. It's really good acting on Kit Harington's part. And Jon's back. I remember I famously made a post when that moment first happened, and I'm like, he's back, and a bunch of people were really mad because they hadn't watched the episode again. I'm like, it's 2016, it's peak Game of Thrones time, it's 9:00 on Sunday. What are you doing not watching the episode yet?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go ahead and tease you a little bit. You said famously, so what, this show up on CNN, or
maybe
you spoiled it for a couple people?
But I definitely spoiled it for more than a couple people.
Yeah, but the fact is, listen, I think if you're really a fan of this show, you knew Jon was coming back. There was no way that you thought he was definitively dead.
It was never like this big mystery, really.
Yeah, exactly. So, I guess they could have left him for dead, but Melisandre is sitting right there. So, again, I think
Oh
It
yeah,
would have been
may
like
as well.
one. It would have been different if they basically had a few of Stannis's men hunting her down. Maybe Alistair. She gets past those men and gets there, and Alistair kidnaps her or whatever. Like there needs to be some sort of like she's in danger and can't really, do the ceremony because we've seen, the Brotherhood without banners and we've seen resurrection possible. And so it's like, why not? Melisandre is powerful. She's used all this other, magic before. And, she can do this type of thing. Like, it's, just a matter. Maybe she hasn't done it before, but like, it's got to be possible.
Absolutely.
And, I think from the viewer standpoint, you're not hoodwinking us. You're not putting any misdirection on this to make it think that this is not going to happen. So I feel like, ultimately, if you're really or truly a fan of the show and you've made it to, what is this, the 52nd episode? I think you knew it was coming.
Yeah, it was one of those things that wasn't that difficult to guess. That's why I kind of like really threw me off. It's like, really? You actually didn't think that this was going to happen? Like, it's just one of those things where it's like, I feel like, that kind of that heightened anticipation of big TV moments kind of eradicates people's common sense. I think is really the only sort of logistical thing that I can come up
Yeah,
with, you know?
listen, like spoilers, I think a lot of people, are really obsessed over having no one talk and mention things. And, at the end of the day, like, spoiling things, like if you could avoid it, fine. That I totally get it. You want to kind of, feel that moment for yourself. But at the end of the day, in reality, sometimes you're going to read an article or sometimes you're going to be talking with a friend and something gets out, and you're going to have something spoiled. And at the end of the day, you could still sit down, you could still watch something, and you could still appreciate how the story is unfolded. And, I think that's the most important part about why we read books, why we, essentially watch movies is because we get to see the mechanics of those mediums at play. To me, it's not the sudden surprise that, I got to see, John wake up. It's really how it happens and what are the scenes and how well crafted they are. That's really what, gets me continuing to watch TV shows. So at the end of the day, I understand that there's this whole section of the, movie watching, TV watching audience that needs everything to be spoiler free. But at the end of the day, I think, film and television is a lot more rewarding of a watch if you're really studying like the scene structures and how things play out, the mechanics, and you're worried more about that type of stuff and really getting to enjoy that than worrying about a particular scene being spoiled or not.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. So with that being said, that is it. That is another episode of Talkin Thrones Season 6, Episode 2. Be sure to keep tuning in every new Friday for brand new episodes. We'll be back next week with Season 6, Episode 3, Oath Breaker, I should say. I'm getting my episodes mixed up. I always get those two episodes mixed up. You guys are not going to want to miss this. We're winding down the journey all the way to the discussion over the Iron Throne, the season finale. Pat, where can the good people follow you?
Hey, listen, I'm on Instagram at Patrick W. Huber, Huber, and I'm posting things there every once in a while. It's very slow going, but I'll figure it out. I'll find something to report or put on there or something visually good looking, and that's it. Just
Awesome.
catch me there.
Sounds good. Yeah. And of course, you can follow myself at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talkin' TV podcast on all social media platforms, including TikTok. Be sure to follow us on Twitch, subscribe on YouTube, all of the above. It as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.